And the last Great Recession officially ended over 5 years ago. That's according to many economists. But for millions of Americans, there's new evidence we're still in a recession with no end in sight. With more on this, Heritage Chief Economist Steve Moore. Steve, welcome back. Good to see you.
Hi, Jerry.
I got to tell you, the thing that really struck me in this report today is that healthcare costs are up 24% since 2007. I guess that cost curve, she didn't bend much, did she?
It sure didn't. And, you know, I wrote a piece in FoxNews.com on this very subject that one of the reasons that Americans have so much economic anxiety is they're not believing the statistics, Jerry. If you look at the official statistics on inflation, about 2%. And that's true. If you look at everything in the economy, all prices are only up by 2%. But what's interesting is if you look at the vital things that Americans have to buy, the essentials, Jerry, things like health care, things like food, energy until very recently, tuition costs, I found that those are rising at 2 to 3 times faster than the inflation rate. It's a reason why most Americans don't believe 2% inflation. And that's what's causing this middle class squeeze, because they have to buy eggs and they have to buy bread and they have to buy, you know, pay for food, you know, for clothing and for tuition. And that's what's causing this squeeze.
I have to tell you, at the same time, of course, as we've discussed many times on this show, incomes are flat, stagnant. We're not seeing, it's not like you're getting a big raise every year that's helping you cope with that. But I want to show you concretely from this story, some of the prices going up. Home internet is up 80%. Cell phone bill up 50%. Now, you can avoid this, but what about rent? It's up 26%. Education up 24%. Let's say you've decided you're going to go on a budget diet. You're not going to eat out anymore. You're going to, you know, cook at home. Food at home is up 12%. There's nowhere to turn.
Yeah, and if you look at what happened with wages and salaries over this period, they've been up about an average of about 2% over the last 5 years. So if everything else that you have to buy, Jerry, those things that you just mentioned, are up 4 or 5% per year, you're losing 2% of your purchasing power every year. And that's, I think, the reason there's so much economic anxiety, even though the official statistics are sort of suggesting, you know, why are people so angry? It's because of things like this.
So food, housing, health care, that's 56% of the average American's budget. So you think about that, that leaves precious little room for a new car, vacation, the kinds of spending we've seen Americans do in the past that really propel the economy. You want to know what's wrong with consumer spending? It's higher prices and no income growth. And today we get new numbers, Steve. I want you to comment on this. The national debt is now over $18 trillion. $18 trillion for the very first time. That boils down to $153,000 per taxpayer. That's me and you, Steve. And then $56,000 per person. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, let me just correct you on one thing. It's actually probably not me and you who are going to pay this. It's our kids. It's our kids and grandkids who are going to get stuck with that bill, although we're going to pay some of it.
They're not going to have the whole bill to themselves. Hopefully, we'll pick up part of the tab.
So I want to put this in a little bit of perspective historically. You know, when I first came to Washington, I worked the last 2 years of the Reagan administration in 1987 and 1988. I remember in 1980, I think it was 1987, we introduced the first $1 trillion budget. And that was, oh my God, $1 trillion we never thought we'd get here. And now we're talking about an $18 trillion national debt just 25 years later. That gives you a sense of how out of control our budget has been, you know, especially over the last 6 years. But this goes back decades.
Goes back decades. I didn't know you were that old. Okay. You're well preserved, Steve.
1987.
So,
thank you, Jerry.
Other information that came out today, I just want to mention quickly before you go. Federal government is collecting more money than ever before. So here you have the debt is higher than it's ever been. They're collecting more money. Like, there's a disconnect there, isn't there?
Right. Well, that's called what we describe that as a spending problem. And I'm here in Washington, D.C., and nobody wants to admit it. They're in denial that there is a spending problem. And when you go to Capitol Hill and talk to a lot of these congressmen and women, they say, well, gee, if we have more revenue. No, you got plenty of revenue. Why don't you get this spending under control, especially the income transfer programs, the welfare programs, and the big health care programs? And you really nailed it. We were supposed to reduce the costs of health care with Obamacare, and, of course, Medicaid and Obamacare costs are exploding.
Let me tell you, it's the congressmen who say our money, referring to taxpayer dollars. That's what really gets me. Steve, thanks for coming on. Great to see you.
Thanks, Jerry.
And now we want to know what you think. Here's our question tonight. Has your income caught up with the cost of living? Log on to jerrywillis.com. Vote on the right-hand side of the screen. I'll share the results at the end of tonight's show.